Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Hamp. Welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going weekly games podcast, the People's Gaming Podcast. We're back here to run down some of what we've been playing, actually, pretty much all of what we've been playing, as well as a few tiddly bits in the news, but we'll be primarily gameplay focused. We always say that, but I don't really know necessarily if it holds true. It's about 50-50. We're batting 500. Not too bad at all. Here with me tonight, thankfully, not necessarily always as usual. We've had some shenanigans that unfortunately some of us have had to deal with. But we are very, very, very happy to have the whole crew back for the evening. Starting with Mr. DBQ Hams. How you doing, DBQ?
I am not at work. That, in and of itself, makes this a wonderful podcast, right? After 2 weeks of getting called into work on a Sunday night, I am glad to be here talking about video games with you gentlemen. Lot to talk about tonight. I am glad to be back to be able to catch up with you both, and thanks for all the great dialogue that you've had over the last few weeks. So, excellent.
As I said, no shenanigans, fortunately, for this evening. And here with me in the third co-pilot seat is Mr. Towmaster99. How you doing, Tao?
I'm doing good. Thanks to I'm glad you're back, DB.
All right, without much further ado, let's let her rip. Starting off with the rundown of the main games that we've been playing tonight. Tao will be kicking things off, and we had. Actually, I've been doing so many agendas and rundowns, and I'm not sure. Last night I was on another podcast, inaugural episode called The Infinity Panel, and we did actually talk about the game that you've been playing. I was looking forward to it. No one else had really played it or was really familiar with it, so I'm looking forward to you bringing us up to speed.
All right, yeah. So first up, I have Pilotman 64. That came out for their expansion pass that Nintendo did, and this is the obviously the 64 version, Nintendo 64 version of Pilotwings. I actually, unfortunately, only got to play maybe like 15-20 minutes of it, like basically like the very first part of it. But I can't remember if I actually played this game back in the day. I'm pretty sure I did, but it's like this all like seems like new to me for some reason. I don't know if I just totally blanked out on the game or what happened there.
Well, we're old, and
it's true.
In 1996, so you know there was a lot going on in your life in 1996. You weren't necessarily keeping your journal of what you've been playing at that point in time.
That's true, but I mean the second game too, though I can finally remember. But I guess that's a little bit different. But I'll talk about that one in a second. But yeah, so I was just basically playing the tutorial level, kind of on this hang glider for the first part, at least that I played, going through these hoops or these circles in the air and kind of have to land it. And it took me. The reason I only played it for 15-20 minutes was one, I just had a little bit of time that I was like, I want to play something real quick, so I'll do this. And then I had troubles with the controls because I was using, just using my Joy-Cons. I was just doing handheld as usual, like I usually do. And I just couldn't remember what the controls are. I'm sure I could have hit like start, or like the plus button and go into, settings and stuff. But I was like, I'll figure it out. So it just took me a little while to figure out how to put my legs down so I can actually land instead of like the first few. Finally figured that out. I was finally able to make a pretty good landing right in the center of the target there you have to land on. That was unfortunately that was pretty much it. But I do want to go back because I do, not so much the Pilotwings 64, but the original Pilotwings back on I think it was the SNES. I remember playing that like a ton when that first came out. So I definitely want to jump back into this game and play this. Try to jog my memory. Maybe I don't know. It's possible I just never played it because I just. Like none of it, because you have like different characters and stuff too, which I don't remember. I don't remember that. Like you can pick, your character at the beginning. So I was just like, I can't remember. It might have been just something I might have just totally passed up at the time. I might have just been like, whatever. I want to play something else. But I definitely want to jump back into it. So Hamp, when you were talking about this, did you get to play a little bit more than I did, or some of the other hosts on the other show?
I didn't play it at all. And it was. In fact, I didn't even know it was up on the expansion pass yet. I knew that it was coming. I'm so glad that DBQ fixed it in the timeline in my head, because now I understand why Well, I mean, I was probably prone to miss a lot of the N64 generation anyway, because I just wasn't a Nintendo person until the Nintendo Wii. But it also fixes in my head why I'm just not familiar with a lot of the N64 titles, because I was gone a lot in 1996 just traveling. So no, that was very helpful. So your description of it was helpful. DBQ's description of the timeline was helpful. I look forward to it. I mean, you know, I became familiar with the title later, I guess maybe in just kind of reading maybe historical, records or whatever of the N64 era. And I know that there were a lot of titles that in my mind, at least from a historical perspective, were kind of high fidelity titles on that platform. What I would think of as advanced titles in comparison to like what other games were like on other platforms and on N64 at the time. So your description of it definitely makes me interested in it. Again, big flight sim person. Look forward to kind of dipping back into the early annals of flight games on home consoles, because before then we had like 2D side-scrolling pixels, of games. I used to love, and before that, I used to love Time Pilot. I used to love 1942, 1943, games like that, and Pilot Wing 64 was kind of the jump, in comparison to those things. So sounds good. And I just like the concept of more value being delivered to the expansion pass, right? It's just we're living in a questionable world, where we never know what's coming to that thing. So it's nice to see stuff pop up. So that's a positive. DBQ, have you played the game at all?
Oh, back in the day, yes, a little bit, and I remember not being super enthralled back at the time, but it was also, I think coming at it with a historical perspective, you can appreciate what it does or what it did at the time, given the technology. I still feel like it's relatively primitive, but at the same time, I can't argue with you. Like, anytime we get anything on the Nintendo Online, that's value add. We're so used to a Game Pass world where there's stuff coming on a weekly basis, where the drip feed of Nintendo gives us something to talk about here as well.
Yeah, and we got a lot of planes, trains, and automobiles tonight too.
Yeah,
so that should be interesting. So next up in the anything else anybody wanted to ask about Pilot Wing 64? Okay, next up in the rundown, I have been playing Back 4 Blood on PC. The first thing that I will mention is, great game. When we played the demo, it was just, there was a lot of blood. And to a certain extent, it was like overly. And I was like, are they doing this to kind of make up for like a lack of graphical fidelity or something like that? But going back and revisiting the game, as we have some other reports this week, let me just make sure this isn't in our news rundown, but it's not. But with Gotham Knights being at 30 frames per second supposedly on Xbox and PlayStation, and just this overall topic of graphical fidelity in general, and what gamers put weight on in terms of how they judge whether or not a game is good or not. It's what I've been talking about, what I really appreciate is how, with even on console with Call of Duty, there's a ton of, levers, dials, switches, and buttons, that you can utilize to kind of maneuver exactly the experience that you want on that title on console, to an extent that I think far exceeds what other titles do, And so to a certain extent, I think there's this impression out there that that consoles now in this generation have like a ton of like control over there, and I'm like, no, like most games on PlayStation 5 and Xbox, you get a choice between quality and performance, and that's pretty much it. Sometimes you get an FOV slider and some things like that, but you don't have anywhere near like the 30 plus variables that you typically have control of on PC. And so Back 4 Blood, I was able to dive into the settings and kind of play with things a lot. I was playing it on one of my monitors with a 240 hertz refresh rate, and before I bumped up to RTX 3000 cards, like that was mostly just like a future proofing move, but Back 4 Blood, I was able to tweak settings, and I was getting frame rates of 190, sometimes 200, 210. So it's fun to go in there and tinker and play around with stuff. And Back 4 Blood, is a game that, despite maybe not necessarily hitting the marquee level of first person shooters out there, definitely has some graphical oomph to it, where you can kind of dial it up if you want kind of a 1440p 60 frames per second experience, but also where you can dial it down and make it hit that spin bike pretty hard and crank it up to 200 plus frames per second. So I had a lot of fun with that. I played the first main act. If we remember a few weeks ago when I kind of went back into it, I kind of went back and did the reboot. I mentioned over the last couple of weeks how I've been enjoying these games that where the developers actually make an earlier level harder, and that was the case. At least that's what I found in playing Act 1, that I felt like the prologue was like way harder than Act 1. And I don't know if they were kind of foreshadowing and kind of trying to feed to you like what it was going to ramp to, but like Act 1 was like a walk in the park in comparison to the prologue and that stinking ship mission. So that was enjoyable because I was actually able to enjoy the game, right? The prologue felt like an anxiety sweat fest, but Act 1 was actually enjoyable, and it actually there was less enough going on that I had enough cognitive load to actually like think, right, while the game was going on, right, that I actually could think about like my weapon slots and what to how to employ my equipment, and getting in the safe, and therefore when I got into the safe room, right, my anxiety wasn't as high, so I was able to think a little more clearly and rationally when it came time to stock up equipment. I've fallen into the paradigm pretty much where when I hit the safe room, I always make my priority getting the team-oriented buffs, at least one of them, if not two or three, just to make sure that like I primarily spend my money on like making sure that the team has extra ammo, or making sure that the team has extra, health slots or whatever, and then I worry about weapons, because really, quite honestly, I don't know that I really, there are, at least with my with the cleaner that I'm playing right now, who I think is I think it's Mom. I don't know if that's her actual name, but that's kind of what she's colloquially referred to. But like, there's one or two weapons like that I really like. I really like the 50 cal submachine gun, and I really like the sniper rifle. And then I think her default is like an assault rifle, maybe. I'm not sure. But those are the three weapons that I typically tend to prefer. And so once I get into the safe room, I'm not really wrapped around the axle about spending a lot of my money on weapons. I pretty much make sure that I tank up on getting an additional, explosive slot, like so for hand grenades and Molotov and whatever, and then the team oriented ones, and then make sure like I have extra health or whatever. So like I said, I had a good time. I'm also getting into that. Like, it's nice to see the community. I feel like the community's evolving a little bit too, and again, this is very subjective, but like, it feels like when we first started, when we were playing the demo, and even when I played in the early months, we were getting a lot of the little script kiddies who were like spawning in, and we're all wrapped around the axle about like making runs. So the randos that I would typically be teamed up with would be like miles ahead of you, just racing through the level, not paying any attention to any kind of teamwork. But it seems like more recently of late, I've been with people who have tended to stick together, people who are actually trying to, play the level and kind of enjoy it, people who are pinging enemies and things like that. So in the safe room, and we had been on a particularly rough level. It was that level where you have to like board up the windows, and then like hold off the assault for a time, and then you have to transit from there over to an apartment building, break people out of they have people kind of up on the walls and kind of like the aliens kind of wall hanging sacks or whatever where they're, you know, transmuting them or whatever. So you have to go in there and rescue people. And then you face a really big boss creature who's out like in the courtyard outside the building. And then you have to get from the apartment building with the people you have rescued back to the safe house. And the safe house is back on like the other side of the map. So we had fought through all that. All of us had gotten in the safe room, and there's one person just still outside, just like fight. Like there's a horde. Like their horde came in, and like the person's still outside. So finally, I went out and got him, and we got in the safe house. But I stabbed him several times once we were in the safe house to let him know we were all not pleased. So. Tao, have you gone back and revisited? I think the other thing, and the reason I'm asking you is because the other thing I'm starting to feel like, I think I'm starting to realize, I've asked a couple times about the progression model, and because it was a question for me, my question is now becoming more of angst, because now I think I see the progression model. I think the progression model is particularly stingy, and actually, quite honestly, I think it's stingier than Halo Infinite's, because I've played 7 levels and I've gotten 1 weapon skin, and I've gotten a bunch of cards. But again, I felt this way since we played the demo. The cards do not convey the tangible impact to you in combat, right? I'm sure they're doing something, but you don't feel it. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like the design should have just been supers and like mini supers like Destiny 2, so that you could actually push a button, see a thing happen, but you don't actually see anything happen with cards, right? You just push the I believe button and think that you assume that you're buffed. But the progression model about the things that I care about, like skins, outfits, new clothing pieces, weapon skins, things like that seems pretty draconian in how they're kind of drib-drabbing those out. So Tao or DBQ, have you guys been back, and are you guys kind of hitting that same realization, or do you guys feel like differently about it?
Excuse me. I had played a few weeks ago, actually, with one of my friends, because he had just picked it up. I think I might have mentioned it on the show back then. So we had only played for like that one session, and I think I might have played like one other time with some other people. Excuse me, on another Discord server. And yeah, I do get the progression model is a little stingy, or I should say a lot stingy, because it's you have to go into the one section. It's like one of the tables you can go into when you're in the camp, and you can buy stuff. But so there's like different. It's kind of like broken up into different sections of kind of like, this is all like power stuff. This is all like healing stuff. It's kind of so on and so forth. So you go into those sections. And then in there, you have to buy like each thing like individually. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. And there's like, and you have to do it like one by one. You can't just like say, "Hey, I want the skin instead of these other 4 things before it."
So I haven't seen where I can buy things in there. What I've seen is when you go into the supply lines thing, where there's like 5 different kind of progression branches or whatever, and then every once in a while in those progression branches, as you spend supply crates, right, you'll hit, which are, like I said, which are mostly cards. Every once in a while there'll be like I hit the weapon skin for like the Scar, right, as I was proceeding down the tree. But I've tried several times to go into like the art, I go to the, because quite honestly, wherever you go in camp, you can always access any of those tabs, right? So it's kind of silly. They're like, you got to go to the armorer to armor. And I'm like, no, I don't. I can go to any one of these projects, right? So, but you go to the armorer, and so I always go to the armorer. I always check and look for and rummage through the weapons to see if there's anything I can just buy or any type of currency I can expend. And I don't see any possibility of doing that. I only see in the supply crate screen where I can expend supply crates and go down, eating those progression trees, and in the path of those hit, a weapon skin or an outfit or whatever. So I think
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Gotcha.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the thing, is you got to kind of go each thing, unless they've revamped it since like a couple weeks ago. But yeah, that's kind of how it's always been, which is kind of, like I said, it's kind of a pain in the butt, because you can't just buy what you want. You have to go through each little thing. And, something might be a card, like you said, might be just some little goofy, you do like the banner stuff and change all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I don't want that. Like I want a gun skin, or like a person skin, or a card. Cards are good too. And the thing about the cards too, you mentioned before, a lot of times if you only have like the one or two things that are in the deck, like you're probably not going to really see much difference. The thing with this game is you got to stack all these cards up, and that's where kind of you see like, like I saw like one person, she had just everything on melee, and she's just like punching people like in one or two hits and they're dead. Unless it's like a higher level person. So, but yeah, it's all about the stacking of the cards. Which, I mean, it's kind of cool. Like if you really get into it, but I mean, like for us, like we kind of just want to get in there, hit and run, and get out and do stuff instead of, like you said, if they did like a super thing, it probably would have been a lot better. But I mean, I guess it is what it is. It's something different at least. So I mean, it's not too bad.
Gotcha. So I think DBQ may have had to step away for a second. Why don't you go ahead and talk to us about your other game that you've been playing in your with your primary time? And he stepped away. I'm actually gonna, because I again left my phone on the other side of the room, so I'm gonna go grab it. But go ahead and hit us up with Goldeneye, and then hopefully both he and I will be back by the time you're done.
All right. So I jumped into Goldeneye to kind of stick on the Nintendo 64 train here. I jumped back into Goldeneye. I actually got a new TV down in my basement, and I wanted to hook up my Nintendo 64. I had to get an adapter for it just because it didn't have the old.
So you're playing the actual Goldeneye.
Yeah, the actual.
Not in preparation for the re-releases on the online platforms, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So
are you running a CRTV, or do you have an ups? What's your hook? What's your setup here?
Yeah, so I had to get an adapter for it because there's no, the TV I have doesn't have the old component or the old RCA cables, and the 64 never had component cables to it, which I could have sworn it did, but it didn't from what I could see online. So I had to get an adapter that's an HDMI to, it's just an HDMI adapter. So it goes to the HDMI into the TV, and then it just has the regular like Nintendo hookup for the monitor connection, into the 64. So, I mean, it doesn't look graphically, it doesn't look good at all. Like it's all blurry, kind of blurry, and just kind of muddy, the graphics, which I was anticipating, which didn't really bother me too much. Like I kind of got used to it once I started playing. But man, playing on that controller, whew, it's rough. Like I can't, like, even though I can invert the controls, the way it plays though, like it does have one stick on the Nintendo 64 controller. It only has the one stick, so you kind of have to use the what were they called, like the C buttons or something. It's like those yellow buttons off to the right to do everything else, like to kind of the camera controls. And it's just weird, like having to press a button, and I'm trying to like just smoothly kind of I've got the stick control, like muscle memory on my right hand, but I have to use these buttons now. So it's just it took a little while to get used to it. And even now I'm still like I'm kind of waiting for that re-release now, because it's probably gonna be a lot better with the modern controls and using I'll probably get it.
So let me ask that question though, because when it comes out to Switch Online, there's been no confirmation that it's going to have any type of updated controls, right? Because you were playing Pilot Wings, and you still have to treat it like an N64 controller. It doesn't have any type of dual stick accessibility there. And so if they simply just port GoldenEye over and treat it like they do the rest of them, you're still going to be stuck with C sticks and using buttons, versus if you're playing it on Game Pass, where you are going to get dual stick controls.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now on because for Pilot Wings it's not too bad, because you're basically just like you're kind of that third person view, so you're kind of just like looking around. I don't really, at least from what I've played so far, I didn't really have to look around like my person or my vehicle too much right now. But I'm pretty sure I was using the right stick on the Joy-Con when I was doing that. I think I'll have to go back and double check, and maybe I'll report back on next week's show. But I'm pretty sure I was using the stick to do that, and it's not, like I said, it's not like I had to. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I'm hoping that
if you can map it to a stick, that would make GoldenEye Online on Nintendo Switch Online a whole lot more functional.
Yeah, and I know it's a super simple game. Like it's not, nothing, like the AI is not terribly smart or anything like that. You like to kind of just walk around, and you can like walk right past them, and they won't do anything. They won't see you. But obviously as soon as you start shooting, like everybody kind of comes to get you. But still pretty fun though. I mean, I still liked it. Like I know a lot of people, they say that when they go back to the games like this, they're like, oh, it's just a nostalgia thing. But I was having fun with it. Just kind of animations, still kind of. even back in the day, like when I was a kid, I just thought it kind of funny, like just how they animated, like when you shoot them and they kind of just like fall backwards, or they kind of like do that twist, like spin fall, like as you shoot them. So I just kind of like that kind of exaggerated kind of movie animation, like move, I should say, not animation, but kind of move when you shoot somebody and stuff like that. But I just got to the dam, but I didn't get to jump off. I think I actually got killed when I was kind of going through it, trying to get to the point where you kind of do that little jump off at a certain point, or at the end of the level, I should say. But I definitely want to go back and kind of give it another try, just because, I mean, I was like fumbling. Like, I think I only had like a third of my energy or my health by the time I got to that point. And just because I was like, just trying to figure out the movement. So a lot of times I would kind of like jump out of, cover and, just get shot up. So, and I don't remember, I don't think there's any kind of health packs or anything as far as I can remember, or as far as I saw. So my health was just like one health bar and that was it. So if I was getting hit, and I just had to be careful, so I have to see. And I was just playing on normal. Actually, I think I had a save on there still from like back when I beat it. So I might kind of go back and just kind of check that out. But I kind of just started afresh. Like I kind of hit that. I was like, what is this? But then I realized I could like pick any level at that point. I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. So I just started a new save. But I might go back and just kind of see how all that is. But yeah, definitely I'm going to keep playing that. Like I said, hopefully when the remaster, or I guess not really remaster, I guess sort of, because it's coming out on other systems, comes out. I'm definitely going to try it on Switch. And I don't know, I think, was it Game Pass on Xbox? It was Game Pass. Okay, I'll probably play it on there too, just to kind of see the difference. And obviously, there's different because you don't have online on Xbox, on the Xbox side. So maybe I'll try the online on the Switch. So I'll keep chugging away at that one.
Is it that you don't have online on the Game Pass, or is it that you don't have local co-op?
I think it was confirmed that there's not online on Game Pass, that the only online is on Nintendo Switch Online.
Yeah, it's just local.
Okay.
Couch co-op.
Gotcha. And does anybody remember the release dates for those, when they're coming to each?
I don't think they actually had one, as far as I can remember. I'll look at it.
Targeting November, I think is.
But yeah.
If you want to give it a
just
look.
kind of a window.
Okay. I mean, that sounds smart. Like, drop it in the holiday time frame, Thanksgiving, vacations, and into the holidays to give people some retro nostalgia to play through. Unfortunately, we'll never get Pierce Brosnan back. That's the real tragedy. Although I guess he is playing, amazingly, he's playing Dr. Fate in Black Adam. I also never thought I would see that. I never thought I would see Dr. Fate brought to the big screen before, much less to be played by one of my personal favorite actors, just because Remington Steele was very big in my formative years, nice job.
Yeah,
and I lived through all that drama of him being cast as James Bond and not being allowed to take the role because they wouldn't let him out of his Remington Steele obligation, and so Timothy Dalton got the role, and then Timothy Dalton only stuck with the role for like three movies, yeah, and then but also then they canceled Remington Steele like mid-season, like after they kept him. I'm like, you guys got to be kidding me. It's like, and of course at the time we thought Timothy Dalton was going to be Bond for like the next like 5 or 10 years, callback to coincide with our GoldenEye N64 discussion. So DBQ, you have been playing some games on PC, as I was, dipping a little bit into the Steam Next Fest demos. Is Steam Next Fest still going on, or was this already done and over?
So Next Fest was the 4th through the 10th, but the nice thing about it is most of the demos, at least the ones that I've downloaded, are they're still up to play. And some of those demos are still out there as well. And, that's part of the Steam infrastructure of play a demo, put it on your wish list. It's a metric for, smaller devs to come to publishers to say they've got X amount of people already wishlisting this game. So it's a way to create some visibility there. So many of these demos are still out there. I have been playing a number of them. I'm going to hit a few of them here and I'll circle back around to some others, but here are 3 that I already I know that are going to be pickups for me. Stick It to the Man, which is Devolver Digital. It's a run-based roguelike tower beat 'em up in a physics based, that's a lot of verbs and genres all thrown into the mix, but basically it's a rogue like, you are a stick figure, and it's a brawler, and you are moving from floor to floor, beating up other stick figures in your corporate office building, trying to get to the boss and defeat the boss, both the boss of the level, but also the boss of the company that you're beating your way through. And so it's got some almost like Gang Beast like physics in it. So it's a little kind of over exaggerated physics, which works to its kind of humor, but it also has kind of a tight brawler, combo system in it as well. And so as you move through, you can drink out of the water cooler, out of the coffee pot to regain some health, and pick up some cards, or not really cards, but pick up skills along the way that you either level up some of your, whether you're kicking or attacking, and some other combos that you can do. And as you make your way through levels, you also unlock other employees. Like you start as kind of a basic person, but then you can be the janitor or the hitman, and come in with each run with some different sets of skills. So it's a lot of fun. It's kind of mindless, kind of fun in a brawler sense, and it's a nice little play, 10 to 15 minutes, feel some satisfaction, and move on with something else.
What was it sounds, certain small parts of this sound familiar. What was the stick figure? There was like a game that you played with that you were playing with your kids. I want to say like in the last summer-ish time frame. Not this summer, but like maybe last year. That was like, it was stick figures. It was something like, it was a big crowd, and yeah,
yeah, that was, oh my gosh, now I can't think of that. But yes, it was, now I have to look it up as we go, but they were not necessarily, these are like stick figures. Like here's a circle, and like you're playing Hangman. The game that we're thinking of, I will look it up because it was great, and I purchased it on 2 different consoles. But everybody's kind of the same looking. Like they are kind of drone based, they're not necessarily stick figures. They've got some texture to them, but they are all kind of very similar there. So as I will look that up in between the next segment as we come back around, just to give a shout out to that game, because it ended up on my superlatives list for a family game that year. Wavetail is another game. It is kind of like a Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild, Phoenix Rising, Immortals Phoenix Rising type by a smaller indie dev. You are, it's kind of open exploration a little bit. But you're all on the water. You're moving from island to island, but there's within the narrative of the game, there's other entities within like the shadows, and it allows you to kind of move within the water, walk across the water, skim across the water, but you are kind of moving, collecting, defeating some bosses, opening up, defeating some of the shadow aspects to open up more of the world. This is a game that is a really short demo. It's very polished. I'm actually kind of surprised how short the demo is, because as I dug more into it, this is a game that came out last year. It came out and we've never heard of it, because guess what? It came out on Stadia in December of 2021, and only on Stadia. So this is one of those that, as Stadia is shutting down, it is one of the many games that are now getting ported over to other platforms. And so this is definitely something I want to keep an eye on. If you enjoy kind of a adventure game aspect in terms of, the Zelda Phoenix Rising type of game, this feels very much in that kind of genre here. So, and then swinging to the other direction is WildFrost. So this is it is also coming out. It's by Chucklefish, being published by Chucklefish, developed by Deadpan. It's a kind of a cartoony CalArt style, cartoony card-based rogue battler, right? In the same vein of Slay the Spire, Monster Train, but it does a few things, even with like Hearthstone, but it does a few things differently where you've got multiple heroes that you're kind of throwing in the way, and depending on what the number they're in, right? What order. There we go. Why couldn't I think of what order? But yes, whatever order you play them in, it has some strategic impact there, but it is done in this kind of Cartoon Network type of art style. It looked really nice. Nintendo announced it this summer, and there's a demo out there, and that's WildFrost. So those are three that definitely stuck with me, and there's a lot more to talk about, but we'll move on because we have some news that just has been itching at me to talk about.
And before we move on, what other games I know we've talked about other Chucklefish games on the show, and in fact, I'm pretty sure we talked about one pretty recently. And did any spring to the top of your mind that we have covered before?
Yeah, Wargroove was another Chucklefish game. Wargroove was that, it is the Advanced Wars type of game. Eastward was that kind of Legend of Zelda, kind of mythic 1980s kind of strange vibe to it that came out. Those are the ones that Time Spinner, which was a Metroidvania, Starbound. They're the Starbound publishers as well, which is like Terraria but in space. So those are some of the Chucklefish games that come to mind for me.
Okay, and as the DBQ mentioned, let's move on to the news. First story in the rundown over on Engadget. Microsoft accuses UK regulator of adopting Sony's complaints in Activision probe by Mariella Moon. And I quote the beginning of the article, Microsoft's $68.7 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard will have to gain approval from various regulators around the world before the deal can go through, including the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, or CMA. What's so hilarious about this thing, just to take a quick pause, is how gamers are becoming very familiar with all of the international trade organizations, which clearly from the conversation, none of them ever knew before. So it's actually interesting. I one of the things I love about my own hobbyist approach to the industry is how it sparked an interest in me right as I was coming of age and choosing what I wanted to be when I grew up, that caused me to seek knowledge, right? Financial, technical, whatever. So it's actually nice that people are getting a chance to see this, although their interpretation of it sometimes leaves a little bit to be desired. But anyway, the CMA, which first announced its investigation in July, published a summary of its initial probe in September and recommended a more in-depth inquiry, or what you will sometimes see them refer to as Phase 2. As Ars Technica notes, a Phase 2 investigation could end up prohibiting a merger or requiring the entities involved to sell parts of a company. Now, shortly after the CMA published the full-text PDF of its decision, Microsoft released a scathing response. I think that might be a wee bit sensationalist, but we'll go on, accusing the regulator of relying on self-serving statements by Sony. So, DBQ, since you mentioned you were kind of foaming at the mouth to discuss this, I'll let you start, because I've talked about this particular topic way more than I ever would have preferred to.
I dug into this a little bit further over on gamesindustry.biz, being both a UK site, which then also provided a little more context on the CMA, the Competitive Markets Authority, and that it is not as definitive at this point, right? Like this is kind of the preliminary findings. This is the initial releases part of it. But the more that I read about this, and initially I thought, okay, it's it makes sense. Regulators are going to be looking into this, making sure there's not a competitive advantage, like in this kind of like, we don't want a monopoly aspect of things. But the more that I read about this, the more troubled I am. And the more, I don't know, righteously justified I feel for Microsoft, in terms of like, there are so many other situations, not only outside of gaming, but even within gaming, that for Call of Duty to pull the weight that it does, it feels so overblown. Like, yes, Call of Duty is very much a popular franchise in the moment. And granted, that moment has lasted for 2 decades. But to say that this one game pulls enough weight that it becomes a competitive disadvantage and has the ability to basically crumble Sony as a platform feels very difficult to stomach when throughout the gaming industry, there are other places where competitive disadvantage has never been looked at all, right? We have exclusive licensing throughout most of the sports franchises, and that has never been, looked at or considered within any type of platform exclusivity, and maybe that's because it's not platform exclusive, but we also get to any other platform exclusive, and maybe it's because I grew up in a platform exclusive era where, you wanted to play Joe Madden, you wanted to play Joe Montana, it was on Genesis. If you wanted to play Mario, it was on Nintendo. Like, platform exclusives are part of what this industry has felt based around for most of its life, in terms of it is something, and maybe it's something that I just have accepted, that there are platform exclusives based on who owns what. Like, if I want to play, up until this year, if I wanted to play Insomniac's Spider-Man games, I needed to own a Sony platform. And okay, yes, now they're on PC. Call of Duty is on PC. That's great. If I want to play Call of Duty, if I have to own a specific platform for it, it doesn't feel all that different than anything else at this point. And that's where, I think, the due diligence of any regulatory agency in terms of creating a competitive market feels understandable. The amount of weight that is being put on an individual franchise when the model exists throughout the rest of the industry feels difficult to stomach. There's my soapbox. Thanks for letting me save that up for a few weeks. So,
Tao, your thoughts on the topic?
I think I can't add anything else that DB just said. It's nice to see DB back and all fired up. But yeah, I mean, it's just he said it all. That's all I'm gonna say.
So my take on it has been, I think the thing I've been concerned about is I don't think it would be reasonable of me to think that either the CMA or the EU or the FTC would not look at this with a hairy eyeball, right? I think, given Microsoft's behavior in the past, I think it would be hard for me to think that they would have gotten through it as quickly as Brazil did, for example. And some of that goes back through a very long legacy and history of things going back 20 years ago, when you look at where they were investigated by the DOJ, ATD, and both here in the United States, but also then in Europe, and in fact, where Europe gave them sanctions that are much more strict even than what was handed to them, right, in the United States, right? In the EU, when you boot up Windows, as part of the setup process, you are immediately given an option of which browser you want to select, right? That was a thing that was enforced back then and continues to this day. In the United States, you don't get that. They were forced to sort of kind of softly decouple, right, how tightly integrated Internet Explorer was, and not directly put things that were a preventative to your adoption of a different browser. But great Scott, in the United States, you open up Windows and it puts Microsoft Edge in your face several times during the setup process, and that continues, right, every time you get a major update. Like, I am so sick of Microsoft Edge. I would have been likely to use it as a technophile, right, who knows that they've moved to Chromium and it's the same, right, underlying basis as Chrome. But I don't, just because I get sick of them constantly advertising it to me, right? But in the EU, right, they were given much more severe sanctions, right, in terms of how they had to approach things even-handed. So I looked at the CMA's responses as something of this nature, which again, any of the big five, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook, right? just where we are in regulatory environments right now, both in the US and in the EU especially, if any of them so much as moves a muscle, the hood on the car is going to get pulled off and they're going to get run through the ringer. And in fact, Microsoft, right, even in the EU has even recently, right, was being investigated because in 2019, what they did was they took Microsoft Office, and if Microsoft Office was being purchased by an enterprise, so Office 365, so it was going to run in the cloud, but that enterprise procured cloud service from a different provider than Microsoft, they actually increased the licensing cost of Microsoft Office. And so they were under investigation for leveraging their strengths in enterprise applications, where they are clearly the market leader, and actually have a legal monopoly, I would actually argue in certain cases. And they were accused of leveraging that to gain advantages in cloud where they are not the market leader. So, and that was just this year. That was in April. So, I mean, they just have a number of things that are going to cause them to be looked at. And then the other thing, and you didn't say this, DBQ, but, this is part of what's going on out in social media. A lot of people are like, well, Brazil and Saudi Arabia found this way, and so CMA should be finding that way, and therefore one's right and one's wrong. And I'm like, you need to, people need to understand. So first of all, the EU has consistently made judgments and ruled on a more techno-fear kind of mentality than the US has. And they have big problems with the fact that when you look at the big five, all of them are US companies, right? And so what they feel is that these big five US companies constantly come over to Europe and leverage a number of strengths that keep their own European tech companies from competing. Right. And so Google was kind of pushed out of France, at one point. They actually pulled out themselves because they were told that they weren't being fair about the way their mapping technology was being used and their search technology was being used. And they said, look, and actually I think in France, the ruling was they were going to have to give a certain amount of revenue when there was a certain amount of ad revenue to news outlets if somebody was clicking the link on a news snippet, right? Because at a certain point they were not just displaying like the link to the website, they were actually giving you like a part of the news article. And so at that point they were like, we're done. And they actually just recently went back into France, like within the last couple of years. So there are things. GDPR is a European construct, right? GDPR came about because the EU wanted it, right? What is the statute? The right to be forgotten, right, is a European thing, right? So all of these things come out of the fact that Europe is much more stringent in its approach to handling the big five than the US has been. And now even in the US, when you look at Lena Khan, there is a ton of tech merger regret that is going to rear its head on someone. I don't know who the example is going to be, but there's a very good chance it's going to be Microsoft, right? And to be quite honest,
I think that the timing around that is ripe for setting an example, right?
Right. And I'll be the first to admit, that's unfortunate, right? Because quite honestly, I feel like of the big five, I feel like Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Apple have been much more sus in their behavior as of late than, when I look at where Microsoft is today under Satya versus where Microsoft was in 1999, 2000 under Gates, and then, shortly thereafter under Ballmer, 180, right, in terms of behavior. But unfortunately, right, it's just the environment, right, and who's going to get sniped, right, because they put themselves on the map to make themselves a target. So I agree with the thing is I agree with your perspective. I feel like there's the perspective that I just voiced too, all of which results in this deal just isn't getting through someplace without it being like heavily scrutinized, right? Is the only real result. And then my only other thing is each of these national bodies is going to rule differently because they each, the thing I mentioned earlier in the week was like, I hope kids are still being taught the Industrial Revolution. And I hope what they realize and take out of that, or like how banking came up, right, in Italy, right? I hope what they're taking out of all that is internationally around the world, commerce and finance and economy have evolved differently. and so you can't have the perspective that like the commercial trade and economic view of Brazil and how they regulate their markets is going to be the same as it is in Europe. It's not. It's different. They've had different events happen. They've had different history unfold, and so all of them are going to have different perspectives that are geopolitically and geoeconomically grounded, that are going to cause differences. So,
well, and the regulations that they're comparing them and judging them against vary from country to country. You know, and not only the regulations based on what you just said in terms of how they were developed and how they came about, but also the scope of those regulatory agencies. That was one of the things that the GameIndustry.biz talked about, is that the CMA in the UK has a wider reach than the comparative agency within the EU, right? Like, it's still going to hit pressure because, as you just mentioned, the EU has historically dug into those things and applied pressure differently. But each regulatory agency, depending on the scope that they have, can tackle this and raise a question about it in a different way. And it creates a number of hurdles. It's not always going to be the same hurdle for each country that it goes through. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other, I think the last dynamic I want to bring up that I also highlighted that I think a lot of people are missing is that also, right, people should understand the CMA up until now, right? This is the first, to me, major case that the CMA has ruled on as a separate entity from the EU, right? Up until now in recent history, they've had to go whatever way the EU had gone, right? Because those things happen.
Because they were part of the EU,
right?
Yeah,
right. So this is a big deal. I personally think part of the dynamic is going on is CMA is trying to show that they've got their big boy pants on, right? And that they're and I think that there is a desire for them to race and rule first before the EU, so they're not seen to be like following the leader. So I just think at the end of the day, it's going to create some interesting dynamics. Heck of fun to watch. That's the main thing. Not so fun to read everybody else's reactions to it. Those are painful. Moving on to the next news story. nVidia cancels the 12 gigabyte GeForce RTX 4080. This story also on Engadget by John Fingus. Were you confused when NVIDIA introduced two GeForce RTX 4080 models with significantly different capabilities? You're not alone. NVIDIA is unlaunching the 12 gigabyte RTX 4080 over concerns they're confusing. While the company still believes the 12 gigabyte version is a solid video card, it said the lower spec model is not named right. The company didn't say if or how it might relaunch the card, and it didn't elaborate further when reached for comment. Tao, any perspective on this news article?
I think this is. I don't know if I put this on there or something similar to this up on the news feed, but it was just kind of a weird thing when I saw it. Like, I think I just saw it like a tweet on my Twitter feed, and I was like, what is? I thought it was just like a joke or something until I started digging into it, and I was just like, okay, kind of weird. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why they would have released these two these two cards and try to give it the same model number and stuff like that. So I mean, it's just kind of weird to me. Like it's not like the console or anything like that. It's these are video cards, so why not just call it the 4070 or whatever, or make up some other kind of number or whatever they want to do. However they figure out the number system. Or that, I just thought it was kind of weird that they would do something like that.
DBQ.
Oh, I mean, let's just see what they actually produce and what their benchmarks are rather than their kind of projected benchmarks and who's got the capacity and the power supplies to run those benchmarks. So, before I worry too much about what gets released and what doesn't, I want to see it out in the marketplace and see how attainable some of those things are for average consumers.
Yeah, and is it just me, or are these cards, these new cards, are they just overkill? like I don't know. Like I get it. There's people out there who wants to have these big monster rigs and like future proof and all that stuff. But I mean, this seems like a little exuberant. So that's just me, though.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, DBQ.
No, I was going to say, and I'll toss this out there because I'm also curious on your thoughts on this, Hamp, as well, is that how much of this is related to kind of the bottom crashing out of the crypto mining aspect of GPUs and that this is NVIDIA trying to, continue to put something out in the marketplace when they're, I don't know that there's a whole lot of profit margin on their 300 or their 3000 cards at this point yet, but it could also be, as you're the person wearing a Ryzen hat, it could also be trying to get out in front of some other things that might be coming from AMD this fall as well.
Yeah, I mean, a few questions around this have come up. So earlier in the generation, I got asked whether or not I thought cards and consoles were going to come out. Well, let me back up. I got asked whether or not I thought this console generation was going to have the same life cycle as the last two console generations have, and I do. And I think, despite the fact, I think to a large part this is going to be a lost console generation, because I think the industry is going to continue to race ahead. And we're gonna hit the 7-year point on these consoles, and Microsoft and PlayStation are gonna flip SKUs, right, to bring out the PlayStation 6, and Xbox is gonna do whatever they're gonna do in their new kind of console, PC-like console world, and the world's gonna move on, and these consoles will have seen less saturation across the market than the previous models would have. And I think that's going to happen because the technology is going to move on. And at the end of the day, although people don't like to admit it, consoles, are a trickle-down derivative of what the PC market is doing. And the PC market, as we see here, isn't going to stop. Regardless of the chip shortages, regardless of whatever, right? There's a good chance we will see them take different approaches, right? If chip and raw material costs are going to become a problem, we're going to start to see technologies come into being. Like we've been on PCIe Express for I don't know how long. Before that, it was AGP. Before that, it was PCI. And that card interface has changed, right, over time, and it wouldn't surprise me if it changes again now in response to some of the constraints we're seeing. So my feeling is these cards are coming out because it's time for them to come out. This is the regular, right, recap schedule that you would normally have seen from NVIDIA. The last cards launched in 2020. It's time for them the difference. I think that the difference is that normally NVIDIA launches its baseline cards, and then you'll see the TIs come out a year later, and then so you have a tick-tock, right? You have the big move of the new architecture, then you have a year later the TIs come out, then the following year you have so you have the tick, the tock, and then you get the next tick, right, by the change in the architecture again. The difference is NVIDIA released its TIs at the same time at the start of the generation, which was kind of weird. And then I don't think we had any new TIs introduced in the 2-year time frame. So now you have the 4090s and the 4080s coming out. Is it overkill? I don't know. I don't think so in comparison to what they've historically done. And of course, again, AMD is moving on, right? Because AMD is going to do what they need to do, and the march of technology continues. As far as these SKUs themselves, it's kind of like I mentioned to Tao a week ago, right? Why is an alpha and a beta? Because I said so. Like, are those names like industry defined? No. So I choose what I'm going to market them as I see fit, and how they're defined, right? Really is it? I've put this cautionary tale out on Twitter before, right? Like, look, be wary of how accusatory you are, right, to developers and publishing companies, because at the end of the day, you don't really know, right, what you're buying, right? You don't know if what you're buying is built on 5 million lines of code or 10 million lines of code or 1 million lines of code. You don't know if what you're buying only has a 500,000 line of code difference from the last thing that you bought, right? And so companies will move that slide rule, move that goalpost as they see fit. So how did I particularly feel about these SKUs? I didn't really care that they were labeled. I think the confusion about there being two different forms of RTX 4080, again, they did this in 2020. But the difference is they launched everything. So you had 3060s, 3070s, 3080s, and 3090s. There were versions of probably the 3070 Ti. But there were versions that had 8 gigabytes, 10 gigabytes, 12 gigabytes that were all in the same retail model number, right? So across, I want to say across the 3060 Ti, 3070 Ti, I mean, my 3060 Ti has like 10 or 12 gigabytes of memory, right? You also had different SKUs where you had LHR models, which were models of the cards that were not as conducive to crypto mining, and so they tended to be on the market in greater supply. So we've had these things before, but the difference is that there was a wider saturation of model number that I think people went by them like as not a big a deal. And so if people wanted the model numbers with the higher memory capacity, they just went and got them, and there wasn't a big thing, right? This is a lot of kind of what I often talk about Sony, right? This is a thing that's a thing because they made it a thing, right? But it's also a thing because this generation launch of NVIDIA cards is fragmented because of supply constraints and because of TSMC raising prices. And so they've now elected to launch the 4090s and the 4080s by themselves with the expectation that they'll fill the model line in with 4070s and 4060s later. And so, I mean, I've always felt that the 4080 12 gigabyte was a 4070 anyway. And again, because I look at things like, these things are only what they're called because NVIDIA decides that's what they're called, right? Like at the end of the day, when I'm going to upgrade, I'm going to go to Passmark, right, to the benchmarks. I'm going to sort, right, based on rank and performance level, and I'm going to pick the card that meets my budget, right? And I don't really care what it's labeled, right, as long as it's an NVIDIA card, right? Because, as I said, I have a problem with Radeon cards and their drivers. So, the 4080 12 gigabyte I would buy if it was in my price range and deliver the performance that I needed. It doesn't matter really how it's labeled. My suspicion is that it's just going to come out labeled a 4070. Right. And again, I go back to that consumer beware of what you choose to gripe about, right? Because this is a perfect example of where people will get sold a 4070 that originally launched as a 4080, and they may not know, or it may not make any difference to them because they weren't paying attention. And should it make a difference? I don't know. It all depends. What I would hope is that it's just a rebadged 4080 with a different model name, that it's not a 4080 with any type of spec difference. That's the thing I feel like to be wary about, is that, do they, by downgrading it to a 4070 in the line, do they do something with the specs to cripple it a little bit, right, to create additional space amongst, right, their product differentiation? So that'll be the interesting thing to see. New cards, always fun. I think these are ones that people can wait on because I don't. Again, if you're playing certain types of games, I think they're worthwhile. Cyberpunk, right, seems to benefit from them. I think what we'll see with these cards is you'll see much more the difference between whether or not you should buy something on synthetic benchmarks or whether or not you should buy something based on actual real world gaming performance, right? Because I don't know that anybody's going to be able to take advantage of these cards. Just like RTX. When I go back to these cards, the most significant thing that's coming out is this, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's this implementation that essentially sounds to me like it's basically GPU hyperthreading, right? And that's going to be great, and it's going to deliver a lot of capability. The problem is that, and it's hard for me to tell how much, developers have to do some work, right? None of these things just DLSS isn't just a button that you just turn on, right? And the problem with any notion of hyperthreading is CPUs have been hyper-threaded and developers don't use them, right? Which is why for gamers, at the end of the day, single core performance is still your big thing that you need to be concerned about, much more so than how great it is as a hyper-threader, which is, what content creators need. Sorry, that was a big dumpster dive. I didn't mean to go that deep. Our next news story starts on Blues News. Overwatch 2 attracts 25 million players in 10 days. Blizzard announces that despite launch difficulties, Overwatch 2 has reached 25 million players in the 10 days since the launch of the free-to-play shooter sequel. This notes that this is almost triple the number of players than the original Overwatch reached in the same time span, though of course you had to actually pay for that one. There are also more details on the promised compensation for those aforementioned launch issues. I've got a couple other links in here that we can just look at for reference. Tao, again, I'll start with you because you've actually been playing Overwatch 2, which you're going to talk about a little bit later. Your feelings on this number, which I'll just mention just as a benchmark, exceeds Forza Horizon 5, which got a lot of pom-pom and cheerleading about, the number of people that played that game on Game Pass when it was made available.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, this one's gone free to play and on multiple platforms: Switch, PC, all the consoles, so including Switch. So yeah, I mean, it's I guess kind of surprising just because there was a lot of controversy with this game coming into it. Not just with Blizzard and Activision, as a company, but just with the game itself, like going free to play and having this live service model now that it's trying to do, or is doing, I should say. So it's like I said, I have played it, and if it wasn't free to play, I probably wouldn't have bought it, at least not right away, because I don't have a lot of people to play this with, and it's definitely a lot. It's a lot more fun with people that you can actually talk with, and that obviously this is going to be a little bit better, but not like I said, it's a little surprising that they reach these numbers, just because, like I said, of all the stuff that's just going along with the company itself. So, and I know there's been a big fervor in the internet, like I said before this, but I guess that always happens with kind of big launch games and stuff like that. They did have, obviously, they've had issues with their launch week, and even just the launch, just a few days when they first launched. But and they mentioned it in these other articles how they're gonna do a couple of double experience points weekends and give out some free skins and stuff like that. So they try to smooth everything out, I guess, with the players. Not a big, I'm probably not going to get the battle pass because that's what they have now with this thing. I probably won't do that. I probably won't play it that much that I'd actually want to run through it. At least not now. I mean, I do have a few friends that are playing it, but I don't know. They're a little they'll hit a game for like a couple weeks and then like bounce off of it, and maybe play it again at the end of the year or like 6 months later. So it's like I don't want to get stuck with the battle pass and and not be able to unlock stuff. And it seems to be pretty slow with the progression, at least as far as I've seen so far. Like I think I maybe got to level 2, and I've been playing kind of off and on the past couple weeks, or I should say past week. So
yeah, people that have run the numbers on like the amount of credits that you earn and what you unlock with it in terms of skins, that it is significantly steep in terms of without the battle pass and what you would earn just in the base aspect of it.
Yeah, and that could be part of it too, since obviously I don't have the battle pass. So you always get all those experience points, boosters, and stuff like that when you buy a battle passes. I'm assuming they have the same thing in here. So we'll have to see, but I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, just and Tao, just to make sure I'm clear and listeners are clear, right? At the end of the day, though, this is not a Tao Master kind of game, right? Because you generally aren't a fan of hero shooters.
Generally, yeah. This one, like I said, I've actually kind of gotten a little bit more into than some of the other ones I've played. I've been mostly just playing the one tank character, Reinhardt. I played a couple of the other ones, so I just need to, kind of play with it a little more. And I mean, it is a well polished game. I will say that, as far as gameplay, at least. I mean, the controls are spot on. Like, it's just more of a thing for me that I have to, I'd have to dive into the game and like really like just play it just so I can learn these things. And it's like I have other games I'm playing right now, so I can't not right now.
So DBQ, what were your thoughts?
No, I was there were many things within your statements, Tao, that will raise questions about the number of accounts, right? Like that. Yes, I have merged my accounts and opened up Overwatch 2. And so I am one of these 25 million people. But
are you only one of them, or are you 5 of them?
No, I'm only one, right? But I did wait actually until this is nice tie back to our other story with Activision and Microsoft. I did wait until the Friday afterward when they announced that you do not need to tie a mobile number to your account if you're a previous owner, which is also the case now with Modern Warfare 2. That they've announced that as well, as that you are going to need to have a mobile number there, which I'm sure at some point will come up in one of these regulatory agencies as they consider what data is being collected on people as well. But back to Tao's friends that he was talking about in terms of, so right now it's the hot new thing. It's free. It's on all platforms. And how many people, the fact that you can dabble in it versus what those active player counts will be, I think is going to be an interesting piece here. And, I think I completely agree with you. I know I completely agree with you. It is an incredibly polished game, and I hope it does well for the developers that spent a whole lot of time and stress and energy into creating it. All the while, the management structure at Activision Blizzard is what it is, as we've talked about over the last year. So, kudos to everybody that struggled through those working conditions to put out something this polished.
Yeah, my only comment is I agree with you, Tal. The thing is, I guess my concern for the game is I've always felt like the game doesn't lend itself to dabbling, right? It only lends itself to really like investing deep in it, right, and staying on it, which means you need to have a regular crew of people to play with, or at least you need to have a regular enough crew that you don't mind the one or two nights that you play with randos, right? Because then it becomes worth it because you're able to continue grinding, right, until you re-rendezvous with your friends. So unlike Fall Guys, right, it doesn't lend itself to, it doesn't have a solo mode or whatever. Everything is so team oriented and so integrated that it feels like it's only worthwhile if you go whole hog. Next news story to wrap up segment 2 over on Destructoid. Switch sports servers are offline as Nintendo investigates issue in latest update. This article from Eric Van Allen. The 1.2.1 update introduced a new issue, and Nintendo is looking into it. Nintendo has taken the servers for Switch Sports down, suspending online play and save data backup while it investigates a new issue causing crashes. As shared across the different Nintendo social accounts, a bug has been found in the latest version. So, Tao, have you actually, or DBQ, have you actually, Tao, I know you posted the news story, but I'll let DBQ go first. DBQ, is this a game that you've been playing at all, or have your kids been playing it?
Yeah, I've been playing. Well, before my son went off to college, he and I played Switch Sports as like a final hurrah before the end of summer, and we were playing online for a couple weeks, leveling up unlocking some of the skins, the equipment, but never encountered anything in terms of this. So whether this came with a recent patch, I have not picked it back up since probably Labor Day.
And what about you, Tao? Were you directly impacted by this? And did you have any specific points you wanted to bring up since you put it in the rundown?
No, I wasn't directly impacted because the way I was playing it was just local co-op or local play. But just thinking back on what DB said, like I totally forgot that to unlock everything, you do have to go through the online section, which does kind of stink. And that's as far as I can tell, because I was trying to do search here while we were going through the other stories before. Like it's still down, so it's been like 2 days. And not only is that the online play, but also the backup saves. So I mean, you know, more than likely nothing's going to happen to your Switch and stuff. But if something does, you know, you messed up with that save. You can't recover that. But obviously, you can recover like from 2, 3, I don't know, however it's long days ago that, you know, the last time you it's saved, but you know, you are potentially gonna you know, have that problem. But fortunately, I wasn't playing online, but kind of going back, and it still kind of stinks that they kind of tied that to the online section, that you had to unlock everything. And yeah, granted, it's just skins and stuff. It's not like you're unlocking like modes or anything, I don't think. So it's just as somebody who likes to customize their players and stuff like that, it just kind of stinks that they did that. And kind of weird too with Nintendo, because they kind of usually stay off the offline or the online stuff. Or almost kind of an, I won't say afterthought, but it's not like the primary focus of things. But here they focused on it, so
yeah,
it is what it is, I guess.
I mean, I'd say weird for Nintendo, but when that thing went down, there was a large outcry about it, and I was like, I think if we look around the industry, I think that's the norm. I think the norm is that if there's online multiplayer modes, that most of your earning has to be done in online modes, and you don't get a lot of credit for things offline. Call of Duty had some campaign oriented calling cards that it would give out, but those were also very particularly stingy and were very high achievement oriented. They weren't gimmies or gummy bears. You really had to. Because I completed the Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War campaign, and I've unlocked like none of those calling cards. They require you to really kind of hit like higher level achievements to really unlock. But yeah, Nintendo continues to show that it has issues when it comes to online, networking oriented stuff. Maybe not the top of the three that are in the mix. This bug does impact online and offline play. So there have been reports of people in offline play who have been caught, who have been impacted by crashes. I think my question is, and maybe you two know, I don't recall right off the top of my head, on most consoles and PC games, the big problem I think that we're starting to see with cloud saves is that you typically have, I take it back. On PC, it will often do both. And so it'll do a local cloud save, but it will do a local save, but it will also back up to the cloud. So this is typically the case with Steam games, right? They will often, even if you're disconnected, you typically have a local save. And the way it does cloud saves, it will copy that save to the cloud. But on consoles, it's typically one or the other. If you click cloud saves, that's the only place it's saving. It's sometimes not making a local copy. Do you remember exactly how does Nintendo do both? Or when you click cloud saves, is it just everything being sent to the cloud? Which would make this situation more impactful.
So the way that it has worked with other games on the Switch is that you've got a local save, and then if you're part of Nintendo Online, it does a cloud backup. So it does have, like, because when I've switched between systems, it will say, there's a save on this, but there's also a save with this date on the cloud. Which one do you want to use?
Yeah. Yeah, you can actually turn that off too if you want to completely turn off online backups. If you have the online service, you can. So it's always just that local save also.
All right, well, that'll do it for the news. Let's roll on to segment 3, and let's run this as a speed round since we're pushing a little late with about 10 minutes left here in our regular time. So, DB, you've been playing more Steam Next Fest demos?
Yeah, so I'll just hit on a couple of these real quick. I'm going to hit just 2. If you have any nostalgia or love for things like Shinobi on the Genesis, keep an eye out for Moonrider. It's got that same kind of visual style and gameplay. The blocky weightiness of a Shinobi game in that kind of side-scroller action game. And then a game that I had been tracking since last year, just by the sheer absurdity of it all, is ProtoCorgi. It was originally supposed to come out last year. It's gotten delayed. It's a small indie little dev. It's a shmup, but you are a robotic corgi, shooting and barking at your way through space and clearing out waves of shmup-like enemies. So both enjoyable, but very niche in terms of its audience.
Sounds like an interesting play out on the market, coming right on the heels of Stray. It seems like there might be some kind of interest in that, but I have been playing Battlefield Bad Company 2 on PC. So my main assignment for this week was to go back and make sure that I was extracting value out of Game Pass, and so that's what took me down the path of Back 4 Blood. Also led me down the path of Battlefield Bad Company 2. My memories of this game, as DBQ mentioned, were old, and so I often talk about revisionist history and in terms of its malicious, intentional use. In this case, I just don't recall a lot of Bad Company 2, and so when I hit that opening scene where you're in Japan, I was sure one of my nitpicky problems with Bad Company 2 was that it didn't actually feature the Bad Company from the original. That's bad memory. It does. You're just in Japan for the opening scene, and then it brings us back to the 4 characters of Bad Company, which are just kind of some of the characters that just have, I feel like I have kind of some level of camaraderie with, and it's kind of unfortunate that this is a franchise that hasn't been revisited by EA and DICE, all of the mucky muck shenanigans associated with the Battlefield series. And I'm like, guys, if you need something to do to score a win, just go back and do a Bad Company. Like, these are wonderful games. I love the destructive environments. It's awesome how, when you're the building wall that you were using as cover 10 seconds ago is, all of a sudden gone. And I often talk about, changing the geometry of the battlefield. This is one where it happens in a very tangible sense. And it really forces you to move and adjust your tactics, right? I was, in one of the scenes I was fighting a machine gun with that had the dude was behind like a shield, and then he had like a 50 cal mounted right on a tripod behind it, and it was a really particularly tough tactical problem, right? And one of the problems was, he and his buddies took down a wall that I was behind, and I kind of shift, come at the problem a lot differently. So I've been having a really good time with it. Plays great on PC. Tao, you have, like I said, lots of planes, trains, and automobiles tonight. So you've also been playing something along that theme as well.
Yeah, so still plugging away at No Man's Sky on Nintendo Switch. It's kind of a perfect game for me on the Switch. Like before, like you really have to like sit down and you have put a good amount of time into No Man's Sky to get a good amount done. But on the Switch, I can do a little bit of things, just power it down. It goes into the little sleep state, power back up the next day. I can do a little bit more. So it kind of works out that way that I can, even though normally like if I was sitting on like on my PC or my Series X, I'd have to sit down there and like play it for a good amount of time, because obviously I got to sit in front of my monitor and stuff. But here, the Switch, playing it all handheld. I played one time, I think it was actually just yesterday, on my monitor, my PC monitor, and it looked fine. It looked just about as well as it did on when I was playing handheld, because the week before I hadn't tried that yet, and I thought maybe it might look a little bit worse, but it pretty much seemed the same. So and just mentioned it before, obviously sometimes when you do get to a monitor or a TV, like it doesn't really look all that well, but I didn't really see much of a difference. So it looks just as good. Obviously it's not PC new generation console quality, but it still works fine for me, what I'm trying to do. So I'm kind of doing a little bit more base building stuff now on this version, and then before I was just basically going through the story. And I actually finished that on, I think, the Series X, or no, back on my Xbox One. I actually finished the story, so I finished through that, and just gonna keep plugging away. I got just a little bit over 20 hours that I've gotten the game since I've had it, so it's I've been playing it a lot, so pretty much almost every day. I always think I'm gonna just sit down and play it for at least an hour, or maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, but I usually only get like a half hour, 45 minutes. So it's a little, obviously progress a little bit slower, but different things. You can set up like different mining setups, and to make all kinds of money and nanites and all this other the different currencies in the game. So it's been a lot of fun. And then, like I mentioned before, playing Nintendo Switch Sports. I actually played with my son. He wanted to go back and do that, so we played soccer and volleyball and tennis. So just going through that and just come back. I'm sure they will. I'll jump back into there so I can start unlock some stuff. And then lastly is Overwatch 2 on PC that I've been playing that on. Actually, past couple days, I mentioned before that I was playing with my friends, so we were plugging away at that, and we were doing pretty good actually. We were winning the majority of the matches, so really enjoying that game. And I know this is Overwatch 2, but I mean, it's Overwatch to me. I played a little bit of the first of the original Overwatch, and it's like the same thing, the same modes basically. I know I think at some point that they're going to release next year. So it's going to be interesting to see like what that is and how they integrate that into the game. So.
I'll be curious if it comes out next year. I mean, I think, yes, there is one in development. Whether or not but yes, it is. I mean, the biggest change really is the 5v5 versus 6v5 and a few modified modes that are not drastically different, but it's still is. I mean, it's Overwatch to the point that it has just replaced whatever launcher you had Overwatch on. You can no longer run that executable. This is Overwatch 2.0.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously you get the new characters that they've thrown in there. So I mean, but they were doing that before too. Introducing characters every so often, like every quarter or whatever, however often they did it. So, but yeah, just plugging away at it, and like I said, whatever my friends are in, that's probably about the only time I'll ever play. I don't know if I'll do too many random matches, maybe here and there, but basically just play with friends.
Very cool. And the other thing that I've been playing to round out the show is, again, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I actually, my other assignment this week, besides Game Pass, was to revisit some of the greatest games of all time on the Xbox platform. And so I was looking at kind of the greatest games that were around during the Xbox One generation, and Forza Horizon figures very prominently. Forza Horizon 4. So I was kind of surprised because I swore that I went back and revisited this one a while ago and went into it and discovered that I had kind of done everything. And I had bought Edinburgh Castle, which I thought was the big get. But apparently there's another castle. There's a Brandenburg Castle. I think that's a $10 million castle. Like Edinburgh was like, I don't know, like 7 million or 7.5, but there's a Brandenburg Castle or something like that, something that starts with a B, and it's 10 million. So now I'm grinding away for that. I don't know if that's been added or not, but I'm going through just kind of now focus on like 100% completion. So I'm trying to buy every car that I haven't purchased in the game to this point, and anything else that I haven't done. I don't see a lot of new events, but there's still seasonal stuff that pops in there. And that's just pretty amazing that, here we are, Forza 5, Horizon 5 has been delivered, and there's still apparently some stuff being seeded into Forza Horizon 4. And there's still some levels in different series that I never unlocked, so I'm going back and playing that now.
Well, it's very timely that you bring that up, right? Because this past week was the 10th anniversary release content for Horizon 5 with, some original cars from each of those different games and some tracks and locales. So it is, you can get back to the UK both in 4 and now in some of the celebration pieces in 5 as well.
Yeah, and because it's all the same engine, like it still looks really good. Like I mean, I'm amazed at how good Forza Horizon 4 still looks, having been released 4 years ago. So as a racer, it just plays really well. I feel like Forza Horizon 4 was a little more. Forza Horizon 5, I felt like was really, really opened up the aperture and was a little more whimsical in kind of its event-oriented approach to kind of draw a lot of even mainstream gamers in. Like you saw people commenting on Forza Horizon 5, people who weren't like historical and traditional kind of racing game fans, right? And so in some ways I feel like Forza Horizon 4 slides its event motif and orientation a little bit more in the Forza Motorsport direction. There's a little less gamey game kind of stuff and more of kind of like purist racing. And I feel like Forza Horizon 3 actually skews more towards that. I think overall I've just gone through this feeling like over the last 3 iterations that, I liked Australia more than the UK and definitely liked the UK more than Mexico. But the UK kind of introduced, progressive weather and has really grown on me over time. And in fact has grown on me in that I feel like there's a little more, street kind of open, wheel to wheel kind of racing, and not as much as the cross country stuff. But we'll see as time goes on. I'm delving back into it in kind of a late game orientation and having a ton of fun with it. I've been playing that on Xbox, by the way. I don't have that loaded on my PC, but on my Xbox Series X, where there is there is a Series XS version of that game. That is going to do it for us for what's on the agenda tonight, gentlemen. Any alibis that we need to talk about before we get out of here?
Just one thing. I looked up for the GoldenEye re-release. I couldn't find an exact date, so they just kept saying coming soon, and that was back in September. So at least that I could see.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I'm sure it'll drop sometime this holiday season, probably. So next week, DBQ will be hosting. So please join us for that. And hopefully all three of us will be back on for that show as well. For anybody who happened to swing through the live stream, we appreciate you. For anybody out there who happens to watch the archive version of this podcast live show, we appreciate you as well. Please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever we post new content. Back next week, as always, 8:45 p.m.-ish Eastern time on Sunday night. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like, and come here to talk about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Hamp from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, joined tonight by my co-host DBQ Hams and Towmaster99. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.